Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the ALUMinate webinar, How to Do a SWOT Analysis for Your Advancement Database. We want to thank AASP for promoting this webinar. My name is Caitlin Scrano, and I'm the Director of Market Research at ALUMinate, and I'll be moderating this session. A few housekeeping items. Attendee video and audio will be muted throughout this session, but you can pose questions in the Q&A box, and there will be a dedicated time for questions at the end of the session. We recommend you put your screen in speaker or presenter view. That way you'll just see who on the panel is speaking at any given time. Everyone who attends today's webinar will receive an advanced copy of our corresponding ebook. To begin, I want to introduce Bob Bailey. Bob is the co-founder and president of ALUMinate. He spent several decades as a senior executive. Prior to founding ALUMinate in 2017, he served as the president of a $3 billion privately held company. Bob also has extensive nonprofit and fundraising experience. He was a trustee and past board chair and interim president of the University of Cincinnati Foundation and campaign champion of the $2 billion Boldly Bearcat campaign. He was the trustee and co-chair of the $74 million Growing Brilliantly campaign for the Morton Arboretum. And he was the director and past chair of the Chicago Children's Choir, and he's a partner in Social Venture Partners. Bob, do you want to take over?
Well, thank you, Caitlin, and welcome everyone today. I'm really pleased to be here with our panel, and we have three individuals with us today who have extensive experience, obviously in data management, data processes, and databases. And so you'll hear from them in just a few minutes. We have Rishika Kandavidi. Rishika is ALUMinate's Director of Data Analytics. We also have Samantha Ford from the Morton Arboretum, who is the Manager of Development Operations. And we have Joe Powells from Ohio University, the Assistant Vice President of Advancement Services. So welcome to our panelists. It's great to have you here with us today. And I'd like to give a little bit of background first before we turn to our panel. Some of you may be wondering why we decided to take this course and why this subject in particular. And we have over 400 people who registered for this session today, so obviously it's something of interest to you. The genesis for this actually came about a couple of months ago when I was looking at a new publication that just came out. Some of you, I'm sure, may be familiar with it already. It's called the Journal of Advancement Analytics, which is published by the University of Texas Press. And it has a compendium of a number of different articles on data management practices in the advancement services area. And so let me give you an example of one of the articles that's in here. On page 31 is When XGBoost Tree Meets Humanity, an exploration of implementing new machine learning techniques in everyday fundraising practices. How many of you know what XGBoost is? Extreme gradient boosting, which is pushing the limits of mathematics. And so these are some of the things that you'll find in this. If you haven't seen this, you might want to check it out. Here it is. You can get it from the University of Texas Press. But it really led us to think about what is going on in new sciences around databases and data practices and things like that. Data is the foundation of virtually everything we do in advancement. It drives our goals for fundraising. It drives all of our fundraising programs, from annual giving to major gift programs, campaigns, obviously planned giving, stewardship, and alumni relations. So data is the foundation. There's an ever increasing demand, of course, for more and more data, actionable data that can be used in these functions. At the same time, we know from the work that we do with our clients that they struggle with stale data, with outdated data, mismatched data, databases and data systems that don't work any longer for their organizations. So it's time to maybe step back and take a look at these systems. And that's what we hope to cover with you today. And I will quote the great philosopher Yogi Berra. Many of you may know Yogi was a catcher with the New York Yankees. And he had a great saying. One of his sayings was, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. And so we think that's a great way to think about this. But how do you actually do this? What techniques can you use to assess your data practices and your databases. Well, in business, for many years, for the last 50 years, a process called SWOT has been used. And we'll cover that in just a minute. Interestingly, in talking with an individual who's the president of a large business yesterday, I mentioned to her that I was doing this conference today, and she said, wow, we do SWOTs on everything. So this is something that we think can be used in just about every process or function that you might have in your organization. So what is it? Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so what's a SWOT? Well, actually, SWOT could be SWOT can be called SWOT, TOES, or TWOs. And so it stands for, I think many of you know this already, stands for your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And it sounds very simple, but it's not necessarily that simple once you get into it. And we'll talk about some of the details behind how to conduct this type of an analysis. Many of the commentators over the years have suggested that you don't start in the upper left-hand corner in doing the evaluation. You don't start with your internal strengths and weaknesses. You start with your external opportunities and your threats. Or you take your threats and your weaknesses, compare those together, and then take a look at your opportunities and the threats or the opportunities and the strengths that you have in your organization. So let's take a look now at the process itself. So let's go to the next slide. When you start this journey, it's important to look at this over a long perspective from a time point of view, not just to look at where you are today and start with where you are today, but to really understand what got you to where you are today. And then you can start to deal with what the future might look like. In a SWOT analysis, it's important to think back five years, 10 years of what has influenced those the things that take you to your current state today. And I'd like to show you something that I found very interesting. As we were doing some work on this, we went back and looked at some of the old literature from 10 years ago. And I know because about 80% of our registrants today are from higher education. You're a member of the CASE organization. And there's a study that was done 10 years ago, 11 years ago, called Use of Technology for Development and Alumni Relations Among CASE Members. This was published in July of 2010. And look over on the right-hand side at what people said. They said, how many of you are using mobile devices in your fundraising activities? Just a very small number of those are using it. And not very many of them said they were going to be using them in the future. Imagine that today, people saying things like that. Incidentally, the iPad was first introduced in April of 2010. And think about how that changed our lives. CRMs, a third of the people were using them. Most didn't have an interest in even going down that path at the time. We're going to talk about CRMs later on today. I think Samantha's going to talk about that in some detail. And you can see use of software and other types of systems and where people were and how many of them were planning to implement changes in those systems. So, that's sort of what was going on 10 years ago. So what's that mean now? What sort of emerging trends actually did occur? Well, big data, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, the rise of those things. Let's face it, over the last 2, 3, 4 years, data security and privacy have become top of mind issues for all of us. If you haven't looked at this, you might want to look at some of the great resources that are out there on data security and privacy, in particular, data privacy laws that are going to be enforced on all of us. There's a great summary of this, I'll tell you, from a group called Spirion, S-P-I-R-I-O-N. If you go to their website, you'll see they have a chart that charts out all 35 legislative initiatives that have been passed or underway right now in every state or many states in the country, and the ones that apply to not-for-profit organizations as well. But those type of things impact philanthropy. People want to know that their money is going towards things that matter. The shrinking donor base, we're all dealing with that, and the rise of the mega gift. And As we all know, those mega gifts are what really make the difference in hitting our goals in almost all cases. So what does that all mean? So let's move on to future trends. What's going to happen over the next, let's say, 5 or 10 years? What are the things that we really have to think about when we think about our data, when we think about our data processes, when we think about data science and how to use it? And here are some of those things that probably should be on the list when you're doing your SWOT analysis. How do these things play into what you need to be doing with your data now and in the future? So consider these types of future trends and get a good perspective on where you've been and where you're going. And what does that tell you? What are the things that you might need to consider? Next slide, you'll see just a few things up here that you probably are considering or have considered or already implemented. Accelerating your integrations, your automation, people. Finding talent right now is extraordinarily difficult. I'm sure we'll hear from Samantha and Joe about this. Just the difficulty that we're all facing in trying to find talent for our organizations. Focusing on the things that matter most, actionable data. At ALUMinate, we can provide up to 500 fields of information. Does anybody really use 500 fields of information? Maybe, I doubt it. We did a study recently on what gift officers think are the most important elements of information they use in fundraising. Investments in security and privacy, segmenting our database to focus it on our goals. And I think what this really means is this whole issue of talent and data scientists, that 10 years ago, we probably didn't think so much about that. So moving on now, let's just move on to the process itself. We'll wrap this up, and then we're going to turn to our panelists in just a minute. So the SWOT process really has 4 major elements. First of all, know where what are the issues? What is it you're trying to address? Are they issues? Are they opportunities? What are the goals? Try to get some buy-in on your goals. Develop a step-by-step process plan to do the evaluation. Focus the evaluation on key impact areas. And last but not least, make sure you don't just let this sit on a shelf, but develop a plan to implement those things that were revealed in the analysis. So what are the details behind this? So here's a chart. It's kind of busy. We don't have time to go through all of this today, but we're going to talk about many of these elements during the Q&A, and our panelists will talk about things they've discussed, they've evaluated in their process. But again, there are a number of elements. I'll point out a couple of elements here that really are extremely important. You can't do this in a vacuum. You really have to identify who are all the clients of your data, who uses your database, how often do they use it, how easy is it to use. Identify those clients, bring them into your process. Bring in some people who may be a little bit out there in terms of how they think about things to give you a fresh perspective. The team is really important when you go down this path. Don't try to do all of this in one session. Do it in shorter sessions where people can think about the discussions that take place among your team members and sleep on it a bit, and then come back and follow up with the process. So we're not going to go through this in detail. We're going to provide this PowerPoint to all of you. This will be a part of our 18-page ebook that we're going to publish and provide to all of you who are part of this session today. So with that bit of background, I'd now like to turn it back to Caitlin for just a minute, and then we're going to go to our panelists. Caitlin, I think we have a poll that we'd like to conduct first.
Yeah, I just want to say a few things before we launch the poll. I see like 2 people have raised their hands. There is no chat feature on this webinar. So if you all have a comment or a question, just use the Q&A feature. And just to be clear, we will be sending out the deck for the session after it's over. So you will have access to the PowerPoint. Okay, I'm going to launch the first poll. So the question is, if you had to give the strength of your database data processes a grade, A through F, what would that be? I see responses still coming in, so I'll just wait a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results.
Okay, here you can see we have a few folks that feel very, very good about their databases. Most people say I'm sort of average, good. Some are not so good, and some look like we have to find a tutor for a few of the folks who took the poll as well. So we'll get back to the classroom here in a few minutes. But that gives you an idea of how people feel about their databases and their data processes. So I'm really pleased to introduce Samantha Ford now from the Morton Arboretum. And Samantha, I know you've been going through quite a journey yourself, leading this journey at the Morton Arboretum. And love to hear from you about the process you used and some of the things that you ran into as you were going through the journey to a new CRM. So let me turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Bob. So as Bob said, I'm Samantha. I'm the Manager of Development Operations at the Morton Arboretum. Just to give you a few quick facts about the Arboretum, we are located just outside of Chicago. We have 1,700 acres of trees and walking paths. We also have a road for driving through the grounds and a children's garden. We were founded by Joy Morton of Morton Salt. We have 57,000 members. We also have many visitors that come through that are non-members who pay general admission. And we offer education classes and events to our members and the general public. 2 years ago, we started the process of evaluating our CRM system using some of these techniques. Razor's Edge was our donor database, mostly used by our development department. And we had several other additional databases that we were using. Some of our strengths are our staff. We have a very talented and knowledgeable staff capable of taking on this project. We have generous donors, members, and visitors that engage with us in multiple ways. And we were collecting good data about our constituents, including memberships, event attendance, education classes, and visits by our members and guests. Some of our weaknesses were that we were using several different systems that didn't integrate with each other, and they weren't cloud-based. These separate systems made it difficult to gather real-time data on how our members were engaging with us. We also had 3 different tools for sending emails and different systems for online transactions. We were also lacking a user-friendly reporting tool that was part of our CRM. So after determining these weaknesses, we determined that our goals were we wanted to implement a system that allowed our staff to have a 360-degree view of all our constituents and the multiple transactions and interactions they were having with us. We wanted to be able to provide CRM access to all our team members and departments that would benefit from utilizing this information and being able to contribute to the information we were gathering. We wanted to provide a reporting interface that enabled our staff to easily create reports and dashboards and conduct analytics. Also, this would also enhance the guest experience by streamlining our online and on-site processes. Ultimately, we wanted to be able to deepen our relationships with our audiences and increase our engagement and revenue. So our evaluation process was we had a CRM steering committee. This consisted of 5 of our leadership team members. We also had a working group of several staff from different departments to participate in the evaluation process, as well as participate in vendor demos. We did collaborate with a consulting company who helped us review and identify our challenges and opportunities for selecting a new CRM. We ultimately had several meetings with small groups based on departments and program areas in order to get input on the data that was being used and how it was being used. So the consultants helped us create a list of our business requirements, and they also helped us prepare RFPs for the CRM vendors. We ended up demoing CRM systems as well as ticketing vendors to help with our online and on-site processes, and staff provided feedback, which was ultimately used in the decision-making process. So in the end, we were using Razor's Edge for our development database, but it was only really being used by our development staff. So we decided to move to Salesforce. We also acquired Acme Ticketing, which integrates with Salesforce in real time. We also selected an email automation and event management products that integrate with Salesforce as well. We ended up working with a Salesforce implementation partner to help us map and migrate our data and to customize and prepare us to go live with our new CRM. We also ended up hiring a full-time Salesforce CRM administrator who is now part of our IT department, which I actually believe was a critical piece to our implementation because no one on our staff had any experience with Salesforce. So it was pretty imperative that we had somebody with that kind of experience. And then as far as our timeline for this, we started our evaluation process in January of 2019. And we went live with Acme Ticketing in June of 2020. And then we just went live with Salesforce in March of this year. So I hope that gives you all a nice example of utilizing SWOT analysis for a real life situation of selecting a new CRM.
Samantha, you did have a question that came through.
All right.
Someone asked, which consultant did you use to assist with the evaluation of your database, and would you recommend them? If you don't want to recommend that person, maybe you could say how you choose a consultant.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to discuss our particular, vendors that we used and our consulting companies probably offline. But I mean, we picked a consulting company that specified in the area of nonprofits and transitioning from Razor's Edge to other systems. So someone that could kind of relate to the process that we were going through.
Another question, can you provide any project cost estimates?
That would definitely be something I'd probably want to provide offline. I don't have any of that information offhand, but I would be happy to talk with people if they wanted to get references or more details about things like costs and details like that.
Okay, so for the specifics of your project, perhaps I can share your your email with the participants after the session.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay.
Samantha, what would you say was the most difficult part of the process? Do you have a thought about that?
Well, it took a long time, but I think it was important to really, the consultants, met with many different groups within the Arboretum to get input, which then we could all hear about because, everybody was kind of working on their own systems. But in the end, it was good for us to hear about what other people were doing with their systems and how they were using them and how we would be able to bring this all together. But I think it was definitely, a time-consuming process, but in the end, it was ultimately needed in order to make these decisions. You don't want to make these decisions quickly.
Well, thanks for that, Samantha. Yeah, we'll hear some more from you, I'm sure, in a few minutes after we talk with Rashika and with Joe. Before we go to Rashika, though, maybe I think, Caitlin, we have a second poll that will sort of set up our next section here, because the devil is in the details when you do these types of analysis. I'm sure Samantha would agree with that, and Joe would too. So let's just take another poll here quickly.
Okay, so this poll is, what is your biggest pain point when it comes to your data process? And here you can see a variety of responses, including something else, in case it isn't captured here. So I'll give everybody a few seconds to respond. And please keep the questions coming in the Q&A. If we don't get to them during the session or during the Q&A, I'll be sure to respond to each of you individually via email. Okay, so I'm going to wait another 5 seconds if you would like to cast your vote. Okay, and I'm sharing the results.
So it's a wide variety, of course. I think this is familiar to our panelists, certainly, and also to all of you who are out there, since this is your information. But you can see this out of date information, quality, matching, not enough time to focus, too much focus on daily staff. So anyway, it gives you an idea. And the reason why we wanted to conduct this poll was because we thought now it would be helpful to have Rashika talk a little bit about some of the details behind these very issues that each of you indicated as a problem. And so, Rashika, can I turn this over to you? And could you take 7 or 8 minutes just to talk through some of these things? And then
Sure.
we'll turn to Joe.
Thanks, Bob. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As discussed so far, the first step definitely is to understand why we're running a SWOT analysis. And then we identify certain areas that we want to focus on. And we have a few up here on the screen, such as data quality, data vendors, analytics, engagement data, CRM integrations, and so on. And I'd like to discuss some of these areas to demonstrate the kind of depth you could get into with your SWOT analysis. And I also have a few tips on that can help you keep your data quality in check and then turn some of your SWOT weaknesses into strengths. Bad data is one of the most pressing challenges and has a ripple effect on fundraising activities. And we've outlined factors that you can consider in your SWOT analysis for data quality in detail in the ebook that you'll receive a copy of, but I'd like to share with you specific data quality use cases today. In my experience, bad quality data could mean different things. It could mean getting mismatched data, meaning getting wrong data appended for alumni, donor, and constituents in your CRM, or invalid information, such as phone numbers that don't work or invalid emails, and badly formatted data that doesn't conform to your format standards. And then connecting the right data to the right people for contact information, professional, wealth, social media data updates is crucial in keeping your databases as clean as possible. Let me give you all an example. If a constituent goes by multiple variations of their name, such as Jonathan and John, algorithms can be used to consolidate these variations into one individual record by accurately matching across multiple data points and then listing all of those different variations on the name on that individual record. Not consolidating these records could lead up to creation of duplicates sometimes, and regular cleanups are necessary to keep the, creating duplicate records in your system at, making sure that that doesn't happen with your CRM. A few things that you could consider is to ask your vendor to see if they run cleanups for duplicate records, and investigate to see how these duplicates are getting created. In my experience, duplicate records could be created due to many different reasons. It could be an end result of, a manual data entry error. It could be possible that the bulk data imports that you'd done probably had duplicate records within that file. By investigating this, you will be able to find solutions and have processes in place to avoid this issue. Bob, we've talked about donor advised funds a lot, and I wanted to sort of ask you about your thoughts on the data recorded from DAF pledge payments.
Well, thanks, Rashika. I assume you're asking me that because I come into the office and tell you that I just received 4 of the same emails or mailers, addressed to Bob, to Robert, to Bob and Rose, and to the Faley Donor Advised Fund. And so, I mean, this is an area that's I think a lot of us are giving attention to right now, is donor advised funds, and how do you identify those donors? Many of those funds do not have a name associated with them. They may have a generic name, but to the extent that they don't, and they identify a particular donor in that name, then I think the idea that you were talking about of trying to have your algorithms to combine that with the other data that you have in your database will help you to dedupe and to consolidate those records. Yeah, I think at some point we're planning on doing another program on donor advised funds. It's a complex and interesting area. But I think this data matching protocol that you're talking about is an important part of it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we at ALUMinate take into consideration fuzzy logic and taxonomy files to look into nicknames to make sure that we're providing accurate matching results. Another example of mismatched data would be the senior-junior example, where two people have the same name and address, but they're not the same person. And this use case could be detected by checking for age conflicts. Matching and looking at such nuances is key to quality data. You can manually review data to check for quality. You can match by name, date of birth, contact information, education, and employment, depending on the data you have available through your vendor. Creating unique combinations of data points to build confidence in the quality of data is very important. We do highly recommend running small batch tests on your source's data quality, especially when you're running bulk data enrichment. This will help you identify unqualified data sources and avoid importing wrong bulk data into your system. With our clients at ALUMinate, we recommend all of our clients to run small batch tests on the data that we provide. That helps them gain confidence in our data and also understand our in-depth data matching. And that way they can confidently load that data into their CRM. With data expansion and big data, identity resolution has definitely become crucial. I have a few important factors that I wanted to share today when you're considering vetting new vendors or new sources. Ask them about how they run identity resolution or data matching. Ask them what the criteria is that they use. And you can also ask them questions about the confidence levels of the data that they're providing and how that is represented in the data files itself. With contact information for addresses, phone numbers, and emails, it's important to know if all of that is formatted correctly and validated to ensure deliverability. When working with a vendor, you should ask them about email bounce rates and if emails that they're providing are validated. In addition, with contact information, I think that it's important to ensure that vendor data is verified to flag the owner appropriately, and this step will definitely help your team make critical data import decisions. I'd like to point out here that it's important to understand that not all data fields have the same fill rates. Some data fields are difficult to acquire and establish with a high degree of confidence. For example, in my experience, good quality email addresses are tough to find. You will typically see a fill rate of, for high confidence matches, you'll see a fill rate of 8 to 15%. And that's because some email addresses are more likely to be mistyped, mismatched, abandoned. People have, a few email addresses that they use for different purposes and sort of lose track of. At ALUMinate, with our matched enrichment, we verify and validate all of our contact information and take pride in our processes to identify high quality data. Now let's talk about data update schedules. I think it's important to think strategically about a few things here. What do you need the data for? What is the immediate requirement? What are your upcoming projects and goals that you have lined up? For example, you could have a telethon coming up. We recommend running data updates every 6 months to keep your database, clean and up to date. But if you have a large database, you can prioritize records for refresh to keep it cost effective. Let's move on to data analytics. It's important to consider, it's important to run prospect analytics based on your organization's goals in a customized manner. Depending on whether you run analytics in-house or if you outsource it to a vendor who offers data analytics solutions, there are a few factors to consider and questions to ask. It's the first step is to definitely understand how scoring and analytics is performed, what your end goals are, and how often do you revisit those analytics rules. I've worked with many different types of data sets and that come from different types of organizations, and analytics rules must be reviewed every couple of months. This will help you include any newly captured data and also make changes to the rules for analytics based on your goals at that time, and also take into account changes happening in the world. Within our company, we, all of us get together every couple of months and review all of our, rules that we have set, review all of our taxonomy files, see if we want to update, if it's time to update a few files. It's also very important to understand how engagement data is being taken into consideration for scoring and analytics. How are you rating this engagement data? A simple example that I could provide is 100 people happy hour versus a 10-member dinner with the president of the foundation. These two events rank differently, and that must be taken into account when you're identifying top prospects. Another example is to consider historical data to model and score your donors and prospects. We have a chart here up on the screen, which has the age of a donor on the x-axis and each gift given by that donor plotted on the y-axis, with the regression line reflecting a giving trend. This graph shows that the donor's giving has increased over time. Having an understanding of analytical concepts, ideas, and their capabilities will help you develop new ways to look at your constituent database. Like in this case, what does lifetime giving at different stages in a person's life mean? At what stage does giving become a trend? How do you know where the trend starts? And it's important to think about timing in this case. At ALUMinate, we take into consideration all of the engagement data you have and know that understanding your prospect and engagement data is key to applying customized analytics to achieve your goals. We also provide visualizations to help you see the story your data is telling and identify top prospects and donors. We run extensive data correlations, sometimes hundreds of millions against many different types of wealth indicators, traditional and non-traditional. The next section here up is the CRM. We highly recommend taking advantage of the questions we have listed in our ebook to run SWOT on your CRM. But some of the things to consider are user experience, value for money spent, reporting capabilities. Do your team members and gift officers have access to the data that they require? Do they have to access multiple platforms to find the data that they need? I think that brings me to sort of the next step of when you're considering SWOT for CRM. An important aspect is CRM integrations. Integrations not only improve efficiency, but also provide a broader single source view of a person's profile. They can increase staff productivity since team members don't need to access multiple platforms to review data. They also provide better data flow, and you don't have to manually input. There doesn't have to be a manual process to input data from multiple sources. Improved data flow will also reduce your risk for any types of data security issues, as staff members will have access to the data that they need, and all of the data lives together in one platform. So that was it from me about tips on a few of these things. Bob, over to you to introduce our next panelist.
Yeah, I'll do that. Before I do that, Rajika, you said something though that was interesting. You said sometimes the correlations run in the hundreds of millions. What are you talking about?
So we use a lot of taxonomy and synonym files to identify, for example, executives, top-level executives that work at companies that are executive level companies or multinational companies or companies that appear in the PPP data, Paycheck Protection Program data. So that is run against like thousands of records. So from the top of my head, I think one of our last file that we processed this week ran about 600,000 million combinations to be able to flag people who appeared with those executive level job titles.
How long did that run?
Oh, days. I mean, there are
Okay.
ways that you can optimize it, and we do all of that. We optimize to make sure we can cut time, but well, if you want to run extensive analysis, it is time consuming.
Well, thanks for that, Rashika. Very interesting detail about some of these different areas. And next I'd like to ask Joe to weigh in here. Joe, I know that you spend a lot of your time thinking about, the future, new applications, new approaches towards things. What kind of learnings can you provide about how you look at things and some of your experience?
Thanks, Bob. Excited to be here. I should give a little brief background on Ohio University for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are located in rural Southeast Ohio. We were actually the first university in the Northwest Territory, founded in 1804. We have about 275,000 alumni and just under 100 total staff in the advancement office, which includes the alumni association. So I just wanted to give some of that background so people know the perspective that I'm talking from currently. And for myself, I think it's important to note that my early experience in this field actually was in annual giving, and I have a degree in liberal arts. So I'm not I don't come from this as a computer or data scientist, which is kind of the long way around saying that the other folks on this call are all much smarter about this stuff than I am. But it does also mean that I tend to approach these kinds of topics from an end user perspective. Over the years, I've learned enough of the technical stuff to be dangerous to some of the folks on this call, but that's kind of always been my second language. And I think that's been helpful to me as I approach data related projects, because I think I do, I try to bring that end user perspective, even when it can be difficult, because it can be challenging sometimes to put ourselves in the minds of fundraisers. And I think the biggest thing that I really appreciated about this SWOT concept when we first started talking about it with Bob and the team is this idea of and Bob actually quoted Yogi Berra. I don't know if I wrote the quote down exactly, but I think it was something like, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. And I think that's the most critical part of any project like this, is to begin with the end in mind. I think we can often make the mistake of thinking of the data itself as an end, especially those of us who end up kind of removed from the frontline operations. I don't know what the case is for all of you, but for me, I have not worked on campus since Friday, March 13th of last year. So it's been difficult to, I don't have the pleasure of running into colleagues in the hall the way I used to. So I'm not getting direct and immediate feedback about data and processes the way I might have been otherwise. So it's really been I've had to really make an effort to think that way without those kinds of chance interactions. And I think, so understanding whether when you're approaching something like an overall SWOT for your process, or even if you're looking at a more specific project, understanding what it is you're working on and what you're hoping to get out of it. So for example, maybe just to simplify it, if you're looking at doing an analysis of your gift processing process, what are your goals for that? Are you simply trying to achieve efficiency? Are you trying to improve accuracy? But then, if you're looking at it purely from an accounting standpoint, you really just need to make sure you have an accurate list of debits and credits, right? I mean, ultimately, that's what you're talking about. But on the front-facing side, it can go so much deeper than that. Are you making sure you understand the change? If you're making changes, do you understand the impact on stewardship or frontline fundraisers? So keeping those kinds of things in mind. And then I think when you broaden it, I think it's also important to apply some of this SWOT thinking. I think for me anyway, when I think of a SWOT, I think of it strategic planning time. I've got to go sit in a conference room for 4 hours and think through this stuff. And then I will, quite frankly, forget all about it in a week. But I think with this kind of SWOT, keeping it front of mind and updating it, maybe not spending, days working on it, but keeping an eye on it throughout the year, because I think it can really help us stay away from what I call the danger of shiny things. I suspect I see 266 participants right now. I suspect 266 of you have had the experience where leadership or even yourself or a colleague have come back from a conference or had a sales call and thought, wow, that thing is really cool. And then you buy it and you implement it. And then you start thinking about how you're going to use it. And I think that there's real danger there of you're letting technology drive drive strategy instead of strategy driving technology. So making sure you understand your strategy and how it fits. And then when shiny things do come up, you can actually refer back to your SWOT and say, well, yes, this is a really interesting tool, but here's where we said we were going with our technology, with our data systems and processes this year. This is what's important to us right now. If that's changed, let's talk about it. But instead of going in and investing in these things and not knowing how to use them, and the other thing about knowing what you have, knowing what your strengths in particular are, is that you may also be able to achieve some of the things that are already that the shiny thing is selling to you or to your leadership. You may actually have some of that in place already. You just weren't thinking about it that way or didn't know about it. So having that at hand can really make a difference there as well. And I think just in general, thinking about advancement services and whatever your particular area is called, if it's not exactly advancement services, but just in general, I think this all ties into what I've seen changing going forward in OIT shops in general, but I think also in advancement services shops, at least in higher ed, is this transition away from that word services. Not that it won't still be in our department names, but kind of transitioning away from thinking of ourselves as a group that provides services to the development office or the alumni association or membership or whatever, and instead as a group, as a team that collaborates with our colleagues to create and execute short and long-term strategies to meet our goals. We're not like I kind of started with, we're not hosting a database because we like to host databases, although we do, but we're hosting a database because we're trying to help achieve the goals of the institution or of the arboretum or whatever we're working for. And I think that even translates towards even the way we think about our CRM. I don't know about you, but I've always referred to whatever, at every place I've worked, we've always referred to the CRM by its name. So we use Razor's Edge as an NXT. So we always talk about NXT. But I really actually believe that we should start changing our thinking towards it is our alumni donor database and CRM. And it just happens to be hosted on Razor's Edge NXT, or happens to be hosted on Salesforce. Where it's hosted and the company we use is simply a coincidence. It's not the important factor. The important factor is that we understand what the database is for, what it does, and how it can help us achieve our goals. And I think that's to me, when I look at any things like this, that's the real key, is understanding where we're going and how we can get there, and then utilizing, all of these kinds of things are tools, and you don't go to Lowe's or the Home Depot and buy a hammer and come home and think of something to bang with it. You go to Home Depot to buy a hammer because you've decided you want to hang a picture or whatever. You buy the tool that meets the need you have right then. And I think that I think is a challenge, but I think it's something that this SWOT process can really help us with. Thanks, Bob or Caitlin, whoever I'm turning it back over to.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Joe, could you talk for a minute just about how you think about the bleeding edge of technology and how it fits in with the future of where you think you're going with your organization?
Absolutely. I think it's such an interesting place to be. I think obviously I think we all probably have budget issues. So I think that's always one of the first things we think about when we think about, going into, sort of the next phase of technology. I think one of the biggest things we're seeing, of course, is AI. And I think it's one thing once I started seeing that transition towards AI, I started trying to do a little research, and there's a book, and I'm going to probably screw up the name, but I believe it's Prediction Machines is the name of the book. And I think that's, it's not, the important thing to think about AI is it's, for the most things that we think about having AI, AI is a very extravagant way of saying it. We don't really have an artificial intelligence. What we have are things that help us make decisions in bulk, right? It helps us. What AI can really help us with is, who looks like, based on trends that we've seen either in our databases or elsewhere, who looks like maybe they're going to lapse this year, and how can we stop them? Or who looks like maybe their giving is trending downwards in terms of the amount they're giving? How do we, and then using that to drive strategies towards making those kinds of decisions. So I think that's a big part of what I see coming next. There are a couple companies who are really taking advantage of that, it seems like, but I think there's a lot of room to grow there as well. I think that kind of thing is hugely important.
Great. One other quick question. In the higher ed sector, of course, where you play, Ohio University has lots of resources inside the university. You have a great engineering program, you have social scientists, you have all kinds of people who teach these type of disciplines. What do you think about using, and have you had any experience with using any of the internal resources that might be available?
I actually, we've done, shockingly little of that. I think that's such a great point, Bob, because there are resources like that throughout, and also probably in colleges of business too. We're talking, thinking about processes, the kinds of processes we're talking about here aren't ultimately all that different than the kinds of processes that the management department could be working with people on. So I think that's something that, especially going forward, like you said, in declining resources at a lot of places, is utilizing faculty and actually utilizing students. There are students who desperately need real world experience on things like data analytics. That would be, I think, a great place to get a start. And of course, when you use a student, to some degree, you are using the faculty, because they're almost certainly working with a faculty advisor to do those kinds of things. That's a great point, and I think something that we all need to be all of us in higher ed need to be so much more thoughtful on in terms of utilizing things that are right there in front of us.
Great. Well, with that, we do have some questions that we'll get to in just a minute. We have about 10 minutes left before the hour's up. And we can stay over for a couple of minutes if necessary. But before we go to the questions, I just want to, so I make sure I do this before everybody disappears. Thank the panelists who are with us today. Joe and Samantha, thanks for being with us today and sharing some of your knowledge. And in just a minute, we'll get a chance to hear from you on some other questions that have come in as well. And at ALUMinate, we really do believe that data really drives everything. And from our point of view, we like to consider ourselves to be, as we say in our motto, we are data matchmakers to help you achieve your mission. So through our data enrichment, our analytics, and our data scoring processes that we have, we hope that we can help advance the cause of data inside these organizations and make it work even better for you. But with that, I'd like to turn to some questions now. And if we have all of our panelists here, let's take a couple. I saw one that came in earlier, that came in actually before the session today, and then we'll turn to some other questions. But one question was, I'll turn this to our panel, is how can I assess how many prospect researchers we should have? It is a struggle to get funding for this role among the very a significant number of demands that we have in our organization. So how might you approach that if you were trying to give some advice about how to think about how many prospect researchers you ought to have on your staff? Samantha, do you want to start, or Joe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, coming from a somewhat medium-sized organization compared to the higher ed, I probably also depends on how many gift officers you have and how dedicated they are to working through their portfolios. For us right now, we have 7 gift officers, but we really only have 1 that's dedicated full-time to working through a portfolio. The others have other program areas that they work on and staff that they manage. So I think it really just depends on your demands from and your needs from your gift officers. I'm sure Joe will have something else to say coming from a larger university and higher ed. I know at smaller organizations, just getting prospect researchers on staff is difficult because it's not always the priority. But I think at least 1, if you have at least a few gift officers, but I know it's larger when you have a lot more gift officers.
It's tough to say. I think, I think a big part of the step first is to make sure everyone understands what their role is. I think we've had some confusion of that here also is, if you have a prospect research team that is still expected to write a bunch of, 4 to 5 page profiles on prospects, you're going to need more. I think most of the industry is trending away from that because there's so little need for it with the internet. But I think being clear about that is so important. But then, yeah, we have 4 total, including the director, and we have 20-ish, 25-ish total fundraisers. Some of those folks have more staff than others. So I think, 4 to 6 or 5 or 6 per fundraiser, maybe up to 7 per or 7 fundraisers per prospect research. Excuse me, I said that backwards. Makes sense for us, but I think, if you're expecting more of them, then you may need more like 1 for every 4 or 5 fundraisers.
Yeah, thanks. This question kind of rings a bell with us a little bit too, because Rashika, maybe you can talk. I know we automating prospect research reports. Joe, to your point, not writing like long, letters about this stuff, but maybe you can talk about the project we went through last year to automate this whole process. What do you call it? You call it the 12-minute profile?
Profile, yes. I think the most important part is to sort of understand what the process is that must be followed when putting this profile together. And the second important thing is to have access to all of the data easily. So if you have to look at like multiple different platforms or like multiple different files or a large file, it's more difficult to get access to that data, more difficult to look at that data. But if you have access to all of that data in one place, and you have a process in place when you're researching online as to exactly how to search and what sources to look at, I think that makes the job easier. And that's how we created the 12-minute profile.
Yeah, we actually hired a mathematics genius from the University of Chicago to put together a series of flowcharts mapping every single step and thought that he had in putting this together. It's kind of very interesting to see the process roll out. Caitlin, what else? What other questions? Is there anything else in the chat? We have some others that were submitted before the session, but is there anything
there? Good one here. Someone asked, I'd be curious to know what advice you might give a colleague who believes our database is such a mess, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Anybody want to tackle that one?
Sure. I mean, honestly, what we're kind of realizing through our whole transition to a new CRM is really all about prioritizing and creating those lists of what your top needs are. And maybe you can also look at, what your wish list is. What is your goal, your ultimate goal? What do you want your database to look like? And that can kind of help you figure out where you should start. I know some of them can be very messy, but ultimately you need that data to complete your business practices and find your prospects. So probably just prioritizing, creating lists, determining where your ultimate goal is for how you want your database to look.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. It's just understanding what your goals are and prioritizing and breaking it up into chunks. I think it can be so overwhelming. So I think understanding, what's most important and how to achieve those little victories along the way. And I think another thing that we are terrible at in advancement services is, kind of patting our own backs, right? Like sometimes it's okay to talk about the great things you've done. Our fundraising colleagues do it all the time. So don't be afraid to do it yourself.
I agree, Joe. That is so true.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've heard this more than once that advancement services, or whatever it's going to be called, is definitely underappreciated, and the ability for that work to really drive efficiency and productivity is there. And so it's great work that you're doing for your frontline fundraisers. What else do you have, Caitlin? Other questions that have come in?
Well, I wanted to say on that last question, and Rashik and I had talked about this yesterday, is like, if you're not sure where to begin, like look for outside expertise or help, those who can help you identify where the challenge is. I think like at ALUMinate, we pride ourselves on being project-based and trying to identify where those bottlenecks are, where those blocks are to help institutions achieve their goals. Another question we got is, I think this was in response to something Joe said, we're experiencing the bright and shiny thing with our leadership right now. Even though the implementers have all advocated for a different product, leadership is moving towards the shiny item, maybe the popular item. How do you steer them away if possible? And if you can't do that, how do you manage expectations after the purchase?
I mean, I think, in my experience, I try to steer them away, but understanding one thing I've learned after doing this for a long time is sometimes it's not going to work, and just going in knowing that, so it's less frustrating. And I think that one way is like we talked, or like I mentioned earlier, is making sure that you have a good sense of what your current capabilities are. So if you're being asked if this new tool does a thing that you can't quite do, but you can almost do, talk about how, hey, let's try doing it this way with what we currently have, and if it works for us, and it's really we're getting good ROI for it, then let's circle back and talk about the shiny thing. And then if you're unsuccessful, I think the important thing it really is that I had this experience. I won't name what we bought, but where they kind of kept saying to us, you really need to know, you need to have a goal for what you're going to use this tool for. And we didn't listen. And when we implemented it, it kind of fizzled out. People didn't really want to use it because we were unclear what it was for. So I think just understanding what you want to use it for, and frankly, and I know this sounds like I'm preaching to the converted with a group of consultants here on the call, but listening to your consultants, listening to the people that are guiding you through it, understanding, they know their product better than anybody else. So if they're suggesting to you that you need to do something a certain way, it's probably worth listening.
I do think too, this might be, I mean, having been one of those individuals who probably went into these pitches with a preconceived notion, and I really didn't want to hear what people had to say necessarily. The one thing though that I have to say is when you come in with a fact-based, well thought out SWOT almost, that says, look, here's kind of the way we see it, a non-threatening approach that says, here's really how we're looking at this internally. Here's why we think this ought to work. I think this is a situation where a SWOT could work quite well in shaping the discussion among leadership. At the end of the day, I think everyone's trying to do the right thing, of course, but unfortunately, all of us, including me, have preconceived notions about what's right or wrong. But I'm happy to say my team at ALUMinate straightens me out quite frequently on that. So
we have another
I
question.
know,
I think this one is directed at Rashika. Where are the taxonomies that you're referring to? Have you developed them in-house, or are they're public sources for things like nicknames?
Yes, so we do get our data for taxonomies from public sources, and then we consolidate all of that information. And we've curated our lists for many years now. We add to it, but we use taxonomy lists for nicknames, job titles, employers. An example for job titles would be IBM versus International Business Machine, to be able to make that match accurately. But that we've definitely used more public sources.
And then one last question, Bob. Sarah asked, could you share the name and the author of that book you referred to at the very beginning?
oh, sure. Well, it's called the Journal of Advancement Analytics. Okay, it's a publication from the University of Texas Press, and it's written it's a curated series of articles that are written about advancement and data. And so if you just go to the University of Texas Press and look for Journal of Advancement Analytics, it's the very first edition that just came out 2 months ago. This is brand new, and it has 7 articles in it. They're all pretty interesting. There's one in there about a summary of how data analytics are used in fundraising, kind of a compendium look at that. So I don't like to be selling books for people or articles, but I actually did find it to be quite intriguing. And I learned quite a bit by reading some of these articles. So I think this is what it's all about. It's really about learning, continuous improvement, and trying to not necessarily jump to the shiny object as we were talking about a minute ago, but being aware of all the things that are changing, and then factoring that back into our thinking about where we are. Where is our database? What are our processes? And how can we improve them on a continuous basis? Don't just do something and park it, but continuously evaluate its efficiency and productivity. So is there anything else? I know we're well over now. It's over our time at this point. I know we have some other questions that came in, I see, but perhaps what we can do is answer those directly. And then Caitlin, perhaps we can pull those together and put together an article that addresses some of those other questions that came in today. And we can share those through our website or through email. So unless there is something else, once again, I'd like to thank our panelists today, Samantha, Joe, and Rashika, for your insights into what you're doing. This is a complicated subject. An hour doesn't do justice, we know, but we hope it gave you some ideas and thoughts about how to improve your processes and how to evaluate all the things that make a difference in your organizations. So with that,
thank you all
thank
for
you.
attending. I will be sharing the recording, the PDF, and the advanced ebook after this session. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you very much.